Almost every disease that we have, nutrition immensely impacts to the point where it can often be curative.
We got pushback from the artificial meat investors. So we were asked to literally take it out of the film.
I can't even trust the data that we're publishing in medical journals anymore.
Behavioral therapy for children with an autism diagnosis is expected to exceed $7 trillion a year.
I used to amputate people's legs because they would not stop drinking Coca-Cola and eating garbage all day long.
We can't allow people that are poisoning our children to get off with limited liability.
Create food as addictive as possible. I mean, that was literally her job, and she was good at it.
We're having to explain that it is a human right to feel fucking great. I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. Dr. Shawn Baker, thanks so much for taking the time today to chat with me. I've been seeing some of your social media posts, and I just find it so entertaining when you do the split screens between you eating a delicious steak and somebody else that you're listening to and commenting on. How did you come up with that format? How did you know it was a winning formula?
One day I would just say I'm gonna eat a steak, and there was something that was so ridiculous that it was like so complicated. And I said, I'm just gonna eat some simple nutrition. I just put it as a side by side juxtaposition, not planning on doing it. And then so many people liked it, so it just kind of, so now we just kind of have a social media team that helps us gather these crazy clips. I just sit there and eat. But I get it. It's an entertaining part, but I mean the reality is, with social media, that's part of it. It has to be someone entertaining to grow your audience, so then you can get your, maybe your more valuable message out there. And so yeah, I'm about more than just eating steak and watching goofy videos. But yeah, it's been fun. It's just goofy stuff.
No, it's neat. It brings a real lighthearted approach to something that's been turned into quite a controversial topic in a world in which cows are now being named as one of the worst enemies of climate, and individuals are encouraged to have been now for over a decade, encouraged to go totally plant-based, and plant-based is what's best for you. And seeing for the first time a real shift in the scientific literature that's helping us realize that many of our chronic diseases are due to not getting enough animal proteins or nutrient-dense proteins, which are much more bionutriently available in meat. And then we now have new science around how you raise the meat really impacts the quality of the meat and how our bodies digest it. So, you've come forward with pretty fun, light content, but regarding something that has massive global implications. And one of the platforms that I care most about is making sure that our precious farmland in this country is protected and respected and understood, and the work of our farmers is understood. But how would you explain kind of the gravity of the work and the depth of it? I mean, looking beyond, the social media aspect of it, what are you really trying to convey to people?
I'm a physician. I've been a physician for many, many years. I got very frustrated with the way our system works. I mean, I think the incentives are wrong. In my own personal experience as an orthopedic surgeon, I remember we had to have patients lose weight to reduce complication rates around total knee replacements in the community, a local community. I was at a local group. And, we were trying various ways, and I was lucky enough, I guess, to put them on a particular diet. And I started noticing that a lot of the patients, if they would do it, their knee pain would go away to the point where they didn't need the surgery anymore, which I thought was really cool. I thought, wow, this is really neat, because at that time I'd done thousands of operations. It was kind of like another day at the office for me. But this to me was quite exciting. And so I brought it forward to my hospital administration, and I said, hey guys, this is really cool. I'd like to start focusing on, maybe half a day a week, just talking more about lifestyle. And I was met with a resounding no, we don't want you to do that, which really, it was kind of a red flag. I said, what do you mean? This is this is good for patients. So I come to the realization that, I mean, it's primarily about the bottom line, as any company is in many ways. And so that started me on this path of just sort of looking at this. And I got very frustrated. I eventually left clinical practice to form my own company based around, lifestyle and nutrition, which I think is so much infinitely more rewarding and quite honestly better for the health of the people. And what I've come to discover is almost every disease that we have, nutrition immensely impacts to the point where it can often be curative. And we're talking, mental health disorders, we're talking autoimmune diseases, we're talking, gastrointestinal disorders. I mean, just about anything you can think
Mhm.
of, it's been helpful. And so for the last almost decade, I've been espousing this message and literally just collecting anecdote after anecdote. We're trying to publish this data. We have a lot of resistance to trying to publish this data. It's kind of, I don't know. I know you probably have an interest in mental health,
Mhm.
and I think that's a huge problem in this country. We've got, 1/5 to 1/4 of the population now diagnosed with a mental health disorder, and that is not good for the health of a nation or a society. And, when every fourth person you see on the street is walking around with a mental health disorder, it doesn't lead to a very well-functioning society. We're seeing some of that
Yeah.
play out day to day, things that, happened with, former President Trump the other day. This is a mental
Mhm.
health issue in large part, with other things, of course, added to that. And so, I mean, I am just very, very, I think this is, I know you're, in the political sphere right now. And I think this is it doesn't matter what side you're on, what team you're on. This affects everybody in an enormous way. And so I'm very passionate about, we've got to do something to stop literally poisoning ourselves. I mean, it's
Mhm.
unfortunate, as you probably are aware. I mean, there's so many foods that we can eat in the United States that are literally banned in
Mhm.
other countries. And it's like, why is that? Why aren't we looking at these things? And the fact that we have this, 42% of the population is now obese. We've got, I don't know, 80+% are metabolically unwell. And it's just on and on and on. It's getting worse and worse. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And, if I need to use humor or, goofiness to try to get that out there, I'll do that. But I mean, behind the scenes, I mean, I'm trying to push for research, and it's kind of interesting to see how. I'll give you an interesting, interesting example. We have, a case series of something called inflammatory bowel disease, so Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. We completely put it in
Wow.
remission. 10 patients, well documented, colonoscopies, biopsies, clear intervention, dietary intervention, and complete resolution. And I've got a Oxford trained PhD at Harvard and Oxford trained PhD at Monterey Tech. They're both submitting to their respective academic centers. And the peer review process is like, we don't want to push it through. They don't want this message to come out for some weird reason. I can't imagine why. Maybe it's because it doesn't match the narrative that if you eat, a diet that is mostly meat, you could get healthy. Whereas as they're trying to say we need to eat this ultra processed, synthesized alternative stuff that's being pushed, in part by, some investment from Silicon Valley, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of venture capital that got tied up in this stuff. There's a lot of money to be made, unfortunately. And, as we've got regulatory agencies that are completely captured by corporate interests. You're running out, you've probably talked about it ad nauseam probably, and
Yeah.
it's, a problem,
It's a
real
huge
problem.
problem. In fact, I've been a producer on a few of these regenerative agriculture films, and the
Mhm.
biggest pushback we've ever gotten, and it wasn't even regarding the Monsanto expose we have in the film, but we got pushback from the artificial meat investors, and we have a whole section of our newest film, Common Ground, which goes into showing actually how these ultra processed fake alternative meats are causing all kinds of environmental issues, from the waste product that comes out, the number of the inputs that go in, the amount of energy it takes, the nature of the footprint of the processing facility. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And then you learn that the inputs themselves are quite dirty, and our bodies struggle to digest many of these highly processed alternative meats. And so we did a really good job explaining that in the documentary. And the amount of pushback the filmmakers received when submitting it to film festivals was enormous. We were asked to literally take it out of the film. And so, we're definitely up against a lot between what I call the real food movement and the fake food movement. And really what belies these two movements is a population of people who don't need to spend an enormous amount of money on healthcare services, that are healthy, that are vibrant, that wake up feeling good and strong every day, whose GI systems work as they were intended to work, and whose metabolic systems are functioning at a pretty, regular, healthy rate. And then belying the fake food movement is quite frankly very, very wealthy corporations that are going to have an endless patient pool and are going to have a consumer base that actually is physically addicted to some of these products, and then also a entire psychology around it that has people believing that they're sacrificing themselves for the greater good, which is actually really, really a powerful thing. We saw it play out in the delivery of the COVID vaccines, that when people feel that they're sacrificing themselves for a greater good, it gives them a sense of contributing to society. Very, very powerful thing that marketing groups have hacked into, and very successfully. And so overcoming that piece, I find, is really, really important. Obviously, there's the animal welfare piece. And if you actually talk to ranchers, some of the best ranchers out there, they go through incredible, incredible efforts to create the most beautiful, humane existences for their meat products. Lots of sunshine, lots of natural movement and grazing, and incredible grazing land. And then, all the way through to processing, if you can do on-site processing. And this is where I want to make the investments into our country, is I want to create I want to bring back the infrastructure that allowed small and mid-sized growers to be able to produce and process and package and distribute locally, because that has all been taken away for the most part. It's why it's almost impossible economically for small growers to make a profit today. And that's been where, I think if you're talking about these counter schemes, how do we prevent the growth of small, medium-sized meat producers? Well, you get rid of their infrastructure, which is what's happened. You've made it almost impossible. Government's turned its back, and the people, as a result, we all suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. And most people don't realize that in the United States since about the 1970s, something like more than 500,000 cattle ranches have gone out of business. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's an alarm. We used to have about 1.3 million. Now we're down to like 600, 700,000, something like that. I mean, I think this year alone, almost 20,000 ranches went out of business. And, people were up in arms about these 3,000 farms being closed in the Netherlands. And we're like, well, there's 20-some thousand every year in the United States or more, maybe 50,000 a year in some years. And so it's a real shame that the food supply is becoming so centralized. And, even you can even look to the meat industry itself with the global packers. You've got the four big packers: Tyson, Cargill, JBS, and Marfrig, or which used to be National Beef. And they're also invested in the alternative meat companies because they're hedging their bets in a way. And as you pointed out, I mean, these alternate meat products are no better for the environment. In many cases, they're worse. And as you mentioned, the inputs, I mean, it's still this degradative monocropping
Mm-hmm.
that goes into to create these products. Even with the cellular-based meat that is supposed to be the next thing it's gonna save us. I mean, those cells don't grow on air. I mean, they need inputs, and those inputs, again, where do they come from? They come from this destructive monocrop agricultural system, and it's just as probably more harmful. And as you know from the regenerative agriculture movement, which I've talked about everybody in that movement. I've interviewed almost all these guys, from the Gabe Browns, from the Will
They're so
Harrises to the
impressive.
Jill Salatins, and
Yeah.
on and on. Yeah, and so, I mean, that is something that, it's not, is it plant, is it animal? It's how's the agriculture produced is really the issue. And, I think it's something that I don't know how much more time we have, as far as, as a society before our overwhelming chronic disease epidemic just collapses, because it's expensive, 4.5 trillion a year to the tune And, most of it, I'd say most of it, probably a good 80% of that could be avoided if we were just to feed people correctly, which I think is doable.
Well, and I've seen statistics now coming out that said by 2030, the amount of money that's going to be spent on ABA, which is behavioral therapy for children on the spectrum, children with an
Yeah.
autism diagnosis, is expected to exceed $7 trillion a year in a market. I mean, and that's just behavioral therapies and helping these
Yeah.
individuals get through the day.
Yeah. And I've got an autistic son. I think I'm not sure if you do as well. I thought I heard you
Daughter,
had
yeah,
a
5.5 years
daughter. Yeah.
old on the
Yeah.
spectrum.
It's tough. It really is. It requires a tremendous amount of resource and support. And one thing, this is just an aside. I mean, I know a number of people on the spectrum that are both adults with and children and parents of children. When they fix their diet, the behavior gets a lot better. They're able to
100%. Yep.
less perseveration, less emotional ability. So, I mean, it's something that we see. I mean, and again, I think the mental health side of nutrition, which has been underappreciated for so long. Maybe you're familiar with the work of Dr. Chris Palmer, and I don't know if you know the Bazuki Foundation. Jan Bazuki was I think her husband founded Roblox, and so
Yeah.
they have quite a bit of investment. And their son had Matt, I believe, had bipolar disorder. And he put it into remission with a basically ketogenic diet.
Hmm.
And the state of America, it's interesting. I'll talk about this sort of pushback. They're doing a schizophrenia trial. They've had pilot studies that have shown clearly like schizophrenia responds extremely well to dietary
Hmm.
changes, more so than many medications. And they have an interventional trial going on in Maryland right now. And the Maryland Secretary of Health has shut it down because of some procedural issue. There was they got it approved. It's just frustrating when you see these very promising nutritional interventions that could impact millions of lives being just, kind of pushed back for some, I don't know what reason. They're
I
just,
had a similar situation. I had a clinical trial almost get shut down at University of Texas, Austin, because the therapy was considered a wellness device, not a medical device. And therefore, my funds, which my foundation was contributing, they were not going to go directly to the medical school. And they were trying to fundraise at the medical school for a new hospital. And if you look at how much money goes into hospitals, it is the majority of the $4.6 trillion annual spend towards healthcare is these buildings designed to process sick people in and out. And we're in a, unspoken battle right now between known approaches to wellness and what the medical industry wants for the world, which is to have control over people's healthcare decisions. And they want to be able to define what is and isn't an appropriate intervention related to healthcare. So this is not something that we should be surprised about at this point. There's a concerted effort to shut down wellness interventions that work. I think we need to stop, being like, maybe there's an underlying motive for why groups are all of a sudden internally shutting this stuff down. And we need to together, I think, come up with a new linguistic rubric to combat it and just say, no, known wellness intervention backed by science and clinical evidence is appropriate. And it will always be appropriate. And you can't shut us up. And by doing so, you are interfering with science and the treatment of our patients.
yeah. I mean, I can look back to when I was as an orthopedic surgeon. If I needed to do, like, say, a surgery on somebody, say a knee replacement, I had so much resources at my dispense. I mean, I'd have a guy that would come to the operating room and stand around in a lead vest for 3 hours. I mean, I would have an entire OR suite that runs at $200 a minute. I would have a recovery room. I'd have a clinic. I'd have a lab. I'd have physical therapy. I'd have imaging centers. All this is, as you know, millions upon millions of dollars just to allow me to do these things. But if I want to do a lifestyle intervention, how much resource do I have for that? I mean, effectively zero. I mean, I was in my clinic handing out, like, go watch this video, go read this book. That's it. And so this is one out of the frustrations where we formed our company, Rivero, to provide the resources that you need. I mean, you had to do it out of your own desperation because it's so designed just to, push everybody through the system in a very predetermined, prescribed way, which ultimately is very profitable for the very few. And I think at the end of the day, I think a lot of people are suffering due to that. And there's a lot of physicians that are getting tired of it as well. I can tell you how, because you get, you go into medical school thinking you're going to be this, I'm going to help people. And then you get there and you find out you're just part of this system, which is just, when I started, this was before the term disease management came out. And I remember somewhere along the line, we started talking about disease management. I'm like, what do you mean disease management? What is that? Well, it's not curing disease. So there's no, that ship is sailed. We don't even talk about that anymore. It's more like, how do we keep people chronically medicated and have their symptoms, modified in some way? And this is where all the investment in pharmaceutical research goes to. Just, we want lifestyle drugs, or we can keep people on them. And you're seeing this with these, these GLP-1 receptor agonists. Ozempic is what's designed to take for the rest of your life, and that's the model. And when you have something that says, hey, no, I mean, literally, you can do that with food. I mean, I've seen that. I've seen the results of that day in, day out. I get people that are on literally, $5,000-$10,000 a month infusions for autoimmune diseases, and they can come off it completely. They're done.
Yeah.
So now they're not spending that $80,000-$100,000 a year. Well, of course, I mean, we're paying through our premiums, we're paying through our tax dollars and whatnot. That's, a huge potential. Obviously, that's a lot of, capital that's at risk that people are reluctant to let go of.
What does your company do? I've never actually seen a company deliver dietary wellness. I've seen a few approaches like with the packaged food delivery services. There's been talks of writing nutritional prescriptions. There's been a few government programs that have incentivized healthy eating, not super effectively, but there's been attempts. And I'd love to understand how, what are the things that are working with your model, and where do you think that you'd like to see evolution?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we spent about 5 years collecting data with people with various diseases, and we put them on very strict elimination diets, these kind of meat-based diets. Often put people in remission, had them reintroduce food, find out what things were continuing to cause issues. Looked at some of the existing literature and came up with algorithms based on different disease if somebody has, say, an autoimmune disease like psoriasis versus depression versus bipolar disorder versus diabetes, they all have a kind of unique needs. Now, some people had overlaps because they have multiple conditions, and of course, the demographics. Is a 72-year-old woman different than a 22-year-old male with regard to how they respond to treatments? And so the answers are yes. And so my partner is an AI engineer, and so we're using some of that technology and, the ability to crunch data to start to develop these protocols that are, a dietary baseline. And then, of course, you have to have, one of the things that I found is, you could tell someone, hey, go eat this way. In your office, you've got, as a surgeon, I had 15 minutes. I would have 50 patients a day. As an orthopedic surgeon, you get like 5 minutes with time. All I could do is hand out flyers. But the frustration I had was, even if you can tell somebody what to do and you think you know the right thing to do for them, they need support. They need support. They need hand holding. They need accountability. They need education. They need technological tools. And so, that's what we do. I mean, we bring them in. They're screened to make sure they're appropriate. We have physicians that start their care. We assign them to a particular dietary protocol. We send them devices to monitor feedback. We upload data. We make adjustments as needed. We have what we think is going to work. And then if it's not working, we make those adjustments. And then as time goes, because we're relatively new, we've launched a little while ago. As we collect more and more data, we'll be able to refine more and more, because my assumption is that, there are going to be some commonalities that we see. Like, for instance, I will tell you that in my experience of just talking to thousands and thousands of people, when we administer diets, we find that people that have diseases that affect primarily the central nervous system, whether it's a neurodegenerative disorder like MS or, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or even some of the mood disorders, or, autism or ADHD or depression or anything like that. Higher fat seems to be more efficacious in those situations, whereas, other diseases don't quite require that. So there's little nuances within there that we can figure out. And honestly, no one's really ever looked at that. You think about, you'll see these diseases, these weird kind of, whatever, incurable diseases, and every once in a while they'll go into remission. And the medical community's sort of curiosity around that is, oh well, 5% of the people spontaneously remit anyway, and then they just kind of ignore them. And to me, I'm like, why aren't you studying those people like crazy? Why is this person remitting and not these? Why aren't these other people? So those are quite the questions that need to be asked, and we try to ask and try to figure out what works and what doesn't. So, but it's about having those resources, because the average physician, even if he wanted to do the right thing, even if they knew what they thought was the right thing from a lifestyle standpoint, we're not trained in that. I mean, we're clearly, as you probably are aware, pharmaceutical companies fund medical school education. I mean, half of our continuing medical education is funded by the pharmaceutical industry. They're always there, in your office, buying your staff lunch and taking you out to lunch and taking you to dinner and taking you to conferences. And it's a very sort of interesting, somewhat perverted, relationship that we have. But I mean, that's, and many physicians have literally outsourced their thinking to pharmaceutical algorithms, and that's where we are right now as a healthcare system. And, to me, it's, it's a problem. It's a real problem.
No, it's almost unhelpful to call your doctor these days, in the sense that they will just go through a list of their top prescribed medications for each ailment, whether it be stomach or infection, or sleep issues. I mean, the list goes on, and they'll just have a go-to list of either over-the-counter drugs they'll recommend or prescription drugs that they'll recommend, and that is their role as a healthcare provider.
That's what they know. That's what they're good at. I mean, that's what they've been trained to do. That's what I was trying to do. And I mean, for some things, I mean, obviously if you get shot or in a car wreck, yeah, I mean, we've got a great healthcare system for that. But I mean, any chronic disease, I mean, we're clearly not doing a very good job. As you know, the healthcare spending that we spend in the United States versus our outcomes is abysmal when we look at other countries. And I mean, everybody's excited about, I know we get excited about technology. Oh, we got all this cool technology coming down the road, but I just don't think you're going to operate or drug your way out of a chronic disease epidemic. I think you've got to fix the root cause.
Right.
And so we're willing to address that. It's just a matter of, as you mentioned, we're stop creating so many damn sick people. You see the political parties arguing about how they're going to pay for healthcare. I said, well, if you stop making so many damn sick people, it'd be a hell of a lot easier to pay for this stuff. And we are literally creating sick people by our food supply, by some of the other things that occur.
Well, and I'm here in Silicon Valley. I receive a deck from an entrepreneur many times a week showing me how they're going to use AI to cure cancer. And I can't think of anything more ironic and unintelligent than trying to use AI to solve for cancer in patients who are developing cancer due to exposomal influences. We've exhausted what we can prove and predict with genomics. The yields are incredibly low. Epigenetics gets us a little bit closer to understanding how our environment and our diet impacts our health. But now we have more and more evidence showing that what cancer is the body's own immune system not working at optimal levels to reduce the propagation of these sick cells. And so you have now a world in which we have a large and growing sophisticated population going the wrong direction. And we're trying to bring them back and help them understand, there's an area of medicine that I really appreciate called cell eugenesis. And cell eugenesis is based on, it's the opposite of how we think about pathogenesis, which is we have to kill the pathogens. We have to kill those sick cells. We've got to just attack them and hold none of them hostage and use whatever chemical means to take them out. Cell eugenesis is the opposite. Cell eugenesis focuses on how do you build up the body's health system, its own internal regulated health system. And we think about the immune system as being foundational to that. But even beyond the immune system is the metabolic system. So, how do you really go in to the metabolic system and boost its robustness? Because if we're really talking about living a life without disease, and I think this comes down to just what our expectation should be for health in this country. It shouldn't be getting sick and then getting access to things that are going to, quote, kill the sickness, which is how we've been thinking about healthcare and healthcare spending. But we should think about how to not get sick and how to boost the body's ability to overcome disease without these massive chemical interventions. And I mean, that's the paradigm shift that I hear a lot of people talking about. Like, it's the approach that you're taking. I've talked to dozens others. But if we don't redefine the paradigm from that approach, and we don't think about the economics from that approach, I think that we're kind of going about it backwards. We're kind of moseying along. We're like, this works, this works, this works, until we realize that we can't access the patients at scale. Everyone around us is still stuck in this old system. We're trying to bring them into the fold, but now it's almost a luxury. Like, you have to be wealthy in order to afford this kind of cell eugenesis of healthcare.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly the cost factor there, but I mean, again, and because I think about I know there's people out there that want to cater to the top 1% and make them live forever, and we see the longevity folks talking about that stuff. But at my core, I'm looking at how can the average person just not be sick or not be so sick,
Right.
and that's what we talk about is just fixing the food first. I mean, there's obviously other things, sleep and exercise and circadian biology and all these things that kind of
Sunlight.
contribute to a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah.
The problem is, I mean, it's part, as you know, I mean, when the cigarette companies bought processed food companies and just kind of ran that model, I had a woman that was a food chemist, worked for one of these major food companies for, she was 60 and she was retiring. And she called me up and said, I want to work for your company because I feel so guilty because my job was literally to create food as addictive as possible. I mean, that was literally her job, and she was good at it, right? So she made all this food we know rewires our brain. It makes us incredibly hard to get off it. So it's really hard to get these people off this stuff. I mean, I as an orthopedic surgeon, I used to amputate people's legs because they would not stop drinking Coca-Cola and eating garbage all day long. And even after you cut off their leg, they still would not stop. I mean, that's how powerful it is. And you think about when we talk about drug addiction, I mean, if you're a heroin addict or something like that, it's a horrible thing. But I mean, heroin's illegal. It's expensive. It can be expensive. It's harder to access, when you think about some of these foods. And I think if we think of some of these ultra processed foods in the terms of as they are as recreational drugs, because in many ways they act like that. They have very similar characteristics to that. They're cheap. They're widely available. They are promoted. They are marketed to. Your grandmother gives it to you. I mean, it's really hard.
Well, and the government is holding up that industry as well. If you think about where all of our farm subsidies go,
Sure.
and you think about our school lunch program, if you really go into the dynamics of this country, we have walked ourselves into this in every way. And more than that, we've protected the position of these large processed food brands. We've protected them in every corner of their supply chain, and then every part of their market as well.
Yeah, I think with the USDA being in charge of our national sort of food dietary policy, I mean, it's such a conflict of interest. As you know, there's a revolving corporate door of, guys that sit in the USDA then go sit on the board of some Nabisco or PepsiCo or something like that. And then, the mission of the USDA is to sell commodities. I mean, it's like, well, if you're where's all that corn going? Where's all that soybean going? What's going into these processed foods? And so it's you just wonder if we could somehow get away from that system. I mean, it would radically change the environment. A lot of companies would go out of business. There'd be a lot of heartburn around that. But I mean, at the same time, do we want a sick
I don't know that
populace?
they would go out of business. I just think that they would reassess their business and work a little bit harder to make their products safer for consumption. I think that's typically where these corporations are producing at such an incredible margin right now. It's a bottle of Coke is a margin greater than any other product you'll be able to go to the grocery store and purchase pretty much. It's being highly subsidized as well by the supply chain, and I think that I don't think they go out of business. I don't think we're trying to quote go after the business. I think we're just trying to bring back a fair level playing ground where real food is supported and affordable, and we bolster the market for real food. We enable the supply chain for real food, and we get the corruption out of it. I think that it would actually create a net economic benefit for this country to see small, mid-sized brands be able to thrive without having to compete against, because I see it across the board. I see meat producers and vegetable producers and these healthy brand companies have to increase their prices because they can only serve a tiny sliver of the high-end luxury real food market. They don't have the ability to scale their product to bring prices down to reach a broader market because they're up against these highly subsidized big companies that have the entirety of the market share for the mass market. I mean, it's like 95% of the market, they own it with these cheap products that make people sick, that are cheap to produce, that have high margins, and they're being government subsidized. So this is where I think that we have to vote on this. I mean, this is a government policy issue, and if we don't have policy leaders taking this seriously, for all of the reasons they ought to be taking it seriously, we're not going to move anywhere. We're going to be stuck in this place indefinitely.
How do we effectively do that? Because you nor I are the first person to know this. I mean, this has been known for a while. There's probably people that have thought about doing this stuff, and yet they keep running up against the wall. I look at it from the market perspective. If I
Yeah,
can convince
same.
enough people
hmm
to move the market, because they'll respond to market demand. I mean, that's clear. I mean, they're going to do that. If everybody says, "Hey, we're tired of eating this garbage. It's making me sick and poisoning. I want to stop poisoning my kids," that'll impact some people. But how do you do it from the government side? Because I I'm very skeptical. I have to just tell you, as a consumer, as a normal American, I'm like, yeah, well, the
hmm
government keeps making these promises and nothing ever happens, and it just gets worse and worse. How do you think you could actually make a difference? And I know you guys are running for the highest office in the land. I mean, what could be done?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at supply as responsible for inflation, so if we just look at the pandemic and how we think about the inflationary effects that we're in today, our supply chain broke in significant ways. And if you look at the supply chain for real food, it has been under systemic attack from the government. I can't even say they've failed and have been negligent in supporting real food production. They've done quite the opposite. They have purposefully driven up the cost of beef. They've purposefully driven up the cost of eggs and chicken and real milk. They've made it impossible for this market to grow. So that's going to result in really expensive product that ends up on the grocery store shelf. If you think about land and water management, I don't know if we have a group within the government that really just wants to reduce the population because that's effectively what they're going to be doing. But they're cutting water. In California, there's a plan right now to cut water to 40% of our farmland and lay a massive percent of our farmland fallow with no plan. And this is under the guise of water resource management. But that's totally bullshit. If you think about where California is today, we are well out of a drought. We've been out of a drought for 3 years. This would be the chance to invest in our aquifers and invest in regenerative agriculture and build up our farmland. We've had 3 years of a gift from God to do this work. And instead of doing it, they're doing the exact opposite. They're doubling down on their efforts to cut water to farmers. And California is the breadbasket of this country. I'm looking at this and I'm just seeing a country that is truly overtaken by a level of corruption that is truly suicidal for this nation.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. 'Cause I've got 4 children, and I'm like, I mean, I'm kind of getting old. I'm like, I'm probably going to be gone long before some of these things come to fruition or they collapse upon themselves. But it's one of those things where when we look at, and I've talked to so many people in the regenerative agricultural space, and I was really disappointed when I talked to Will Harris, who's at White Oaks pasture. You may be familiar with,
visited
but
him.
he was very pessimistic about the future of that,
Yeah.
and I'm just kind of like, I'm trying to cheerlead for this stuff, and I'm like, why are you so pessimistic about it? He just feels like he's not making the progress he wants to. And I asked him about what legislation could be passed, things like, I'm sure you're for like Representative
Yeah.
Thomas Massey's talking about Prime Act.
He's
And
fantastic.
there's different things that, I like he's a good guy, but I like the thought. I mean, there's got him Alan Williams, who is Joyce Farms. And he's somebody, if we could just convert something like 40% of our current pasture land and reclaim some of the monocrops and put, cows on them and manage them appropriately, we could literally offset almost all
of
the
it,
carbon emissions in the entire
Yeah.
United States. And so why aren't we looking into that? I mean, it seems bizarre that we're not utilizing this resource. And, maybe it's because these big corporations see expanding market share, as you mentioned, with the processed food companies. The ROI is higher. The markup is bigger. Whereas, it's more expensive to raise animal agriculture, unfortunately. But I mean, it's ultimately better
Well, what I
nutrition.
see happening is that we're all asking these questions, which are the sane and logical and responsible questions to be asking right now. And the problem is that I don't think, and again, like I'm embedded in this culture of Silicon Valley that's trying to create artificial solutions to everything from food to human reproduction to thinking to like human brain processing. And so, we have to understand that this topic sits within a much bigger topic. And that bigger topic is around this ethos around becoming almost godlike in our creation ability. This obsession with creating these artificial environments that are satiating, that are even more satiating than a pure human existence. And when you look at our challenges through that lens, you have to then shift your entire debate paradigm to not just only defending what seems to be logical and reasonable, but then to defend the paradigm of what it means to be human. And this is where I've been trying to bring the conversation, because without it, we can't even have a real debate. We don't get anywhere in the conversation when you're talking to people who fundamentally don't understand the value of eating real, organic, nature-based foods. They actually just fundamentally don't value it. And if you're debating with people in power who don't value something that you value, and you're doing everything you can to educate them to value that, you have already lost the debate. You've lost the war. And so I'm looking at it now from a more litigious viewpoint. And I think this becomes a human rights issue. It becomes an issue of us standing up, defining what a human right is, the right to thrive, And then explaining that the right to thrive is defined by metabolic health. And this is that jump that we have to get people to see. And that actually becomes quite a legal argument on behalf of the rights of humanity to feel and to thrive in their existence, which is why I find your social media so fascinating because here you are, you're sitting here and you are so healthy. You oftentimes don't even have your shirt on, and you're eating real food and you're saying, I feel fucking great. I am thriving. Look at all these other people who are thriving. Don't you want to thrive too? And that's where we are in the argument. We're having to go back and having to explain that it is good to thrive, that it is human goodness, that it is a human right to feel fucking great. Right? Excuse my language, but like that's where we are. It's not so much of logic around, well, conservation and cows, they're fine. And like I've had this argument now such a multitude of times, it doesn't move the needle because people have gotten to the point where they have subscribed to the dopamine cycles that are these shorter term dopamine cycles that get people to quick satiation and from one moment to the next, but without perception of this overarching metabolic profile and lifespan that they're living.
Yeah, it's a very interesting and powerful way to look at things because, I see people at the end of suffering and they get to such a point of pain that they're like out of desperation. They try this nutty, crazy, eat a bunch of meat diet. And then all of a sudden they feel good. And they're like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, I spent 25 years in misery, which was, by the way, avoidable and unnecessary. And they get very frustrated about that. But you get the people in there when they're in their younger years and, you feel pretty good anyway. And then it kind of slowly and insidiously creeps up on you until you get to where you're 40 years old and you feel like, you don't feel very good. I mean, we're literally have people that are, effectively dead at 30 and they don't get buried till they're in their 70s, but their life is basically, it's not, they don't feel very good. And it's kind of like, when we talk about, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and human rights, I guess some people would push back and say, well, do you have the right to eat food? Do you have the right to, what is guaranteed to you? What can we guarantee people as a government? Can we guarantee you're going to feel good? We should be able to guarantee we're not going to actively poison you. That would be a start in
Well,
my
we
view.
do have laws. We do have protections. Those protections are trying to be stripped away. I mean, we see the EPA, allowing for all kinds of known carcinogens to be sprayed on our croplands. We see the big brands trying to preempt liability wherever they can, including now the Farm Bill. They just got very, very clever in trying to preempt liability from cancer exposures from certain pesticides and herbicides. But that's where I think we have to go back to this human rights argument. I do think we have a right to health. How can you have happiness without health? I don't know. I see sick people, they're not happy. And are they liberated because of their incredible economic dependence on medicine? I mean, their entire life depends on these interventions, these daily sick management interventions. Is that liberty?
Yeah, I would agree. In many ways, it's not. We have this. Well, it's a big hurdle you got to get over. There's a lot of obstacles. And what allies do you see in the political, sphere that can potentially help get us done? I'm looking at as my company grows, and let's just say hypothetically, hopefully it will happen. We get big enough to where we start impacting the bottom line of these big companies, and they just go and squash you. They say, well, we're gonna talk to our friendly senator who we've got in our back pocket, and they're going to create legislation that makes it impossible for you to do your job. How do you combat that? I think you get other corporations on your side that also have the expensive lawyers that can, they can fight at that end. But I'm just looking at it seems like you're up against an enormous amount. I think there's, I don't know, it's $7 trillion of the capital invested in all these food companies and pharmaceutical companies that are, they obviously, they work in symbiosis. More sick people, more
Yeah.
people need medication, and on and on and on.
Well, I saw one model recently that made me really excited. It's one of the first holistic healthcare groups led by two MDs to address the autism epidemic. And they have the first combined approach looking at biomarkers and labs, and they integrate nutrition into the recommendations. And so they also treat with behavioral interventions as well, but they're not just strictly focused on autism as a behavioral intervention. They really look at it as a medical condition, which, as you know, being an autism parent is a good leap. It's the leap we should be going towards and investing in, even more so than behavioral interventions, because, as you said, it's amazing how behavioral shifts when a child feels better. Interestingly, their largest support have been from third-party payers. So Aetna Health and many of the insurance companies, they look at this and they think, okay, this is great, because if we can just make one check to a group versus multiple checks across all of the medical needs of a child with autism, that's better for our bottom line. And I think something like your program would eventually be looked at similarly by these third-party payers is, okay, let's just look at this strictly economically. We don't need to involve ourselves in any other metrics. Is this going to reduce our spend per patient? But it's still, we're still spending, we still have a market, we have a business, but we're not going to, we're not going to overreach on any one of our patient spends, because this cost per patient is like right in our sweet spot. And I think if you can propose that and you get those third-party payers in line and supporting you and even investing in companies like this, that to me is going to signal probably one of the biggest changes.
Yeah, we hired a research team to look at cost savings. I mean, as we realize that is, if we're looking at particularly going to enterprise markets, that's a thing that's going to really, induce people to want to utilize what we have to offer. So we're certainly aware of the financial side of things. Do you find that there is I mean, this is a controversial topic for sure. When we went through this pandemic, from 2020 on, so on and so forth, I was, censored, shut down, because I was just saying, hey, let's talk about informed consent here. I wasn't like anti or pro vaccine, but I was just very much saying, hey, we need to look at, how old are you? How sick are you? Those types of things. And I mean, almost all my social media was canceled, and I just stopped
Wow.
talking about it, because my partner said, hey, look, we can't have you being shut down because we're using your social media as part of a way to advance the goals of our company. So I felt really frustrated. I mean, as someone who, as a surgeon, I mean, it was my job to provide the best informed consent that I could to my patients. And some of the patients, made choices I clearly did not agree with. But I mean, that's their autonomous right to do that. And I felt I saw a lot of that being,
Hmm.
stomped on during this whole pandemic thing. And I think that was something. But I mean, now we're seeing kind of an extension of that. We're going to continue censoring opinions we don't like. If you're talking about, a different dietary protocol than what's accepted by the USDA, then we're going to start shutting you down as well. I mean, do you have any concerns about the power of censorship and messaging and having free flow of information where people can make informed
Yeah, and
decisions?
as a shareholder in a lot of these companies, like I'm a shareholder in many of these tech platforms and social media and internet companies. I think it's bad for the shareholders too. So, if you have an internet that people don't trust anymore, and after the pandemic, people don't trust search results that they're seeing. They're not happy with what they're seeing on Facebook. Facebook has lost massive numbers and usage. And then you look at X that has used free speech and open discourse as their central brand, and their numbers have skyrocketed and their engagement has skyrocketed. And as a shareholder, I think that anybody who's looking at this should also be concerned. As an American who is supposedly protected by the Constitution, I mean, there's not a greater threat to our freedom than the most public common forum for speech being censored for certain qualified voices. And why are they being censored? Where is the collusion? I mean, this is the biggest, I think, hot button issue of 2024 is understanding the degree of collusion and who the parties are that are involved and what their motives are, and quite frankly, what laws are they breaking and why are they able to get away with it and continue to get away with it. So there's a bunch of different ways to look at the problem and address it. I'm very motivated to address it as a concerned shareholder because this impacts the overall trust and faith in these companies, and their missions are not being upheld. They're capitulating, they're throwing away the best part of their brand, and for what? And we don't know what is, but as a shareholder, it behooves you to ask that question. Like, why are they throwing away access to good information and threatening their overall value as a company? And what are they getting in exchange? And who is getting that benefit? So it's so that's, I think that there's going to be movement. I know personally I'm interested in participating in these shareholder actions. And I think that more and more people, once they see, the impact, there's been, the Twitter files that have had a major impact. There's been multiple investigations now into YouTube censorship, and Facebook as well. And I think as we understand that Pfizer really did do some things that were wrong during Operation Warp Speed, and we're going to see lawsuits against Pfizer come out showing that there was collusion between Pfizer and the government. And if we connect that back between collusion between either Pfizer and the social media platforms or Pfizer via the government and the social media platforms, we're gonna be able to draw a much more compelling picture that shows the degree of wrongdoing, and then whether or not they're going to be held accountable in one form or another, becomes irrelevant. But I mean, maybe not irrelevant, but I think what is more important is that wrongdoing is identified, that the actors are identified, that the motivations and the gains and the exchanges are identified so that it does not happen again.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. It reminds me, I don't remember the Charlie Brown and Lucy from the Peanuts, cartoon where every year, Lucy to hold a football for Charlie Brown to kick, and she pulled away at the last minute. He'd always go flying and land on his back. And I see that over and over again as a physician. I remember when Vioxx got pulled from the market. It was a drug that I used to prescribe. It had pretty good efficacy for arthritic pain. But, apparently they knew that they were knocking off so many people for cardiovascular disease. And it was known. They paid a fine. I mean, it tends to be a slap on the wrist. I mean, it's $2 billion, whatever, several $1 billion, which seems like a ton of money. But when they've got, when they've made $100 billion on the drug, it's like the cost. It's like their spare change drawer. No one goes to jail. No one gets fired. They pay a little fine. They keep moving on. How do we prevent? What is the disincentive if it's just the cost of doing business and they just kind of, we're just going to build that in our pricing structure? How do we disincentivize those people truly to not do it again, because it keeps happening over and over again?
Well, glyphosate's a really good example. So, and this is why protecting tort remedies is so important, because when you remove tort remedies, as was the case with the Vaccine Act, it preempted anyone from suing the companies for vaccine injury related damages. You then have a really dire situation in which people actually end up not being able to get good information, and they are, kept from seeing justice fulfilled. And that hasn't happened with glyphosate, which I think is one of the most important case studies of today. Glyphosate now has been found liable for billions of dollars in damages related to a very specific form of cancer. And they've been able to prove it in case after case that high exposure to glyphosate is directly linked to these cancer cases. And they've been held accountable in very, very significant ways. And it's caused huge problems for the company. And the company's had to really shift and change how it thinks about the glyphosate market. It's getting desperate. It's doing all of these very dirty things to preempt further liability. But I would say overall, we, the people, are winning that battle against glyphosate. And it's really productive. And I think if we let that play out in other fields and other medicines and foods, unsafe foods, I think we just have to continue bringing the full force of the law in these tort environments. And we cannot go soft. Like we really have to band together in these class action suits or whatever other means is available, whether they be shareholder suits, and we hold them accountable time and time and time again. If we don't have corruption in the government, this model works. It doesn't work when there is corruption in the government that is, sneaking in these preemptions into the Farm Bill. So I think if you are a young politician or a business leader or a doctor or a member of a board, this is where you need to focus, is making sure that those tort remedies are protected. And if you're appointing a judge, if you're a governor and you're appointing a judge, you have to make sure that all of your appointments are truly appointments that are made on behalf of the people, and that these are not corrupted judges. It again goes back to corruption. And if you look at the new president of El Salvador, his only platform really was combating corruption. It was combating corruption and protecting the people. If that was the primary motive of every single politician today, this situation that we're in would rectify itself in a matter of, I think, less than a year. I mean, we could probably see real change happening within 6 to 8 months as we can bring more and more of these cases forward and have real confidence that we're going to get a just outcome.
Could we, when I go back to the regulatory agencies, FDA, USDA, so on and so forth, when we know there's the corporate capture, how do we remedy that? Do we just say, look, it's illegal for you to go sit on the board of, Pfizer after you work at the USD or at the FDA or something like that? Is that something we can do and just say, or, you've got, congressmen trading stocks when they have, SEC violations, if they weren't congressmen or something? I don't know how this works. It just seems like, isn't there just like some simple, it's like, this is illegal, you can't do it, and that's the end of the story, right? So we can kind of root out this corruption.
Yeah, that would make a lot of logical sense. I mean, first and foremost, you have to take the conflicts of interest that are just on their face, conflicts of interest, out of the picture. If you've previously worked as a lobbyist, you should not be running any one of our agencies. That's a no-brainer. If you have significant holdings in any of the companies that you are trying to fund, you should not have that job. That is not a job that if this were a judge, you'd be recused. Like in a similar sense, when you are running an agency, you are a judge of how these finances and policies are going to be directed. And if those are being biased by existing holdings, you should not be in that job. And to say that you can't find qualified people who don't have conflicts of interest to run the FDA is a complete fallacy. Same with the USDA. I can find you overnight, and you probably have a great Rolodex as well of individuals that would be mightily well suited to be running these agencies. And those are the ones that we need to be pushing forward. But if you're a politician who's received millions of dollars from Pfizer, your Pfizer rep is going to be pissed off at you. Your Pfizer donor is going to be pissed off at you if you bring in somebody that's going to, cut into their bottom line. But that's why we need to change our election finance laws, or just vote people in with that degree of integrity. And I know that sounds so unrealistic in today's environment, but it's absolutely possible. We have a ticket right now. We have Bobby Kennedy. We are a ticket that has not taken any money from Pfizer, nor will we ever. So they exist. They're few and far between, but Thomas Massie is a great example of another one. Ron Paul, he's just been a lifelong devotee to these morals. They exist. Rand Paul, they're out there. We've just got to be aware that these are the kinds of politicians we should be throwing our weight behind.
Yes, about Ron Paul signed my letter of recommendation to one of the military academies when I was a kid. So I went to high school in his congressional district, and I went to school with both Rand and Rand Paul and his younger brother Robert. But so interesting, and we've there are a few. I see Thomas Matthew, and of course he's been demonized. I mean, everybody in Congress apparently doesn't. Apparently has a lot of people he makes angry all the time. But I think you need that. Assuming you guys were able to get into office, what does it look like to you? If you're looking at, hey, we win the election, we get in office, how do you restructure things? What do you guys have, like a game plan of like what will we do, or what are like the first priorities?
Well, first priorities are to take away any of these preemptive pieces of legislation that allow people that are poisoning our children to get off with limited liability. So that to me is one of the most important ones. Our judiciary is the last point of relief for the American public. And if you can't rely on that final backstop for justice, you can't rely on anything in this country. So we have to protect legal rights in the judiciary from any legislative preemption. The second piece is really going into the agencies and changing their leadership. And this is the part of political will where most executive leaders just can't get it done. They can't get it done because they're reliant on that donor base. But if you're not reliant on that donor base, it's incredible what you can accomplish with righteous political will. And when you have a farmer running the USDA using what budget they have, we have a plan right now that looks at the Farm Bill. This Farm Bill is going to be almost $1.5 trillion. It's going to be the biggest farm bill in American history. It's never been over $1 trillion. If you just took less than 1% of the existing Farm Bill and invested in regenerative agriculture, like cover crops, no-till equipment, and infrastructure, you would transform this country immediately. In a growing season, you could transform this country. And again, you don't even have to take a heavy regulatory hand or pen to any of this and achieve many of the goals that we all share. And you do it through the supply chain. You do it through managing inflation around the cost of food. And you do it by invigorating a real farm economy, not the bullshit corporate mega producers, but a true American farm economy. but it takes political will, and that will really comes from managing your own conflicts.
Yeah, fair enough. And do you find like in California, I mean you're plagued with wildfires every year. I mean, it's summertime, there's fires. I've got a friend, he's a regenerative rancher down in Orange County by the name of Frank Fitzpatrick, and he has, he runs his cattle. He clears out the
Hmm.
basically the combustible material for them, and that's a way that could be employed. Whereas you see that has not been done for I don't know what reason. I mean, maybe they just think, well, we don't want cattle out on these hills and stuff like that, or in that area. I mean, where do you see, I mean, the makeup of, I mean, because we have such a
Yeah.
monocrop system, and you can drive, you drive through Highway 5, and there's all these almond orchards everywhere. You go through like what is it,
Hmm.
Modesto, and it's just they're doing that. Do we need to just overhaul agriculture in general, in your view?
I visited a regenerative almond farm in the Central Valley of California last month, and it was really inspiring because I didn't know you could do almonds regeneratively. I just assumed this was a high water crop, and most of these farms were located in parts of the Central Valley where, really we shouldn't be farming almonds in. But then I saw the regenerative solution to an almond farm, and I was blown away. I mean, they had figured out how to create such a dense cover crop that on the hottest day, it was 107 degrees, and we measured under the cover crop. So there's about 6 inches of cover crop protecting the soil. And the difference in temperature between the soil and the top of the cover crop was it was 50 degrees different.
And
I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. And they were also doing grazing, and they have this huge chicken and egg production operation, and they do grazing with sheep, and it all comes together in harmony, and they're still producing these incredible high quality almonds. They're using less water, their aquifers are restored, and they're only a few years into this. So, and they're making it work commercially as well, which is amazing. So I think that the issues that we think are so big and so intractable are not. They're actually not. We've made them big artificially because there's been other commercial incentives to make them seem so impossible to solve.
yeah, that's what I hear about. I'll just mention I interviewed a guy named Alejandro Carrillo, who's down in the Chihuahuan Desert in Mexico, and he's literally turning the desert
Yeah.
green through regenerative agriculture. I mean, as you're probably aware, it actually changes the local weather patterns
Microclimates.
because as the ground becomes more water, able to retain more water, and it doesn't just run off, it actually contributes to the local water cycle, and so you actually can change the weather in a way that provides
And
more growth
moisture.
and probably more moisture and a better environment for
Yeah.
that. So that's really, really, amazing to see that sort of stuff.
I think there's a big group of us out there who see and value a future for this country in which people are thriving and the land is thriving. And I think that we value it. I think that's what makes us effective in our messaging is that our hearts are in it. We believe in it. We want this for everybody. We want to see people thriving. We hate seeing people suffering. And if we can band together and make that the norm, it's not just a selfish pursuit. It truly is a pursuit for the best case scenario for the future of this nation.
Yeah, I can't. Well, I don't think anybody can argue with that. It's one of those things where when we have a sick population like we do now, it's never been as sick as. I mean, this is the most sick we've ever been as a population. Our life expectancy for the first time over the last few years has started to go down, which has never happened
Hmm.
before. And it's like this is probably the first generation where their parents will outlive their children, which is kind of disturbing to
Yeah.
think about. Um, Do you guys see any sort of, major changes that could come about with regard to how we're educating our kids as far as this? Because I mean, the kids are being sort of browbeaten into a certain sort of belief system, and I mean, it's like I see my kids coming home telling me I'm not supposed to be eating meat, and I'm like, no, I got to unbrainwash you and tell you how things are working. I mean, how do we? Because ultimately, obviously, it always depends on the future generations. At some point, I'm going to be an old guy, and I got to pretend I've got to depend on the younger generations to keep me alive, or whatever I'm gonna whatever I'm gonna need it when
Yeah.
I'm old. How do we get these kids involved?
Well, the Department of Education has been completely captured as well, just like every other agency.
Now, who are they captured by? I'm just out of curiosity. I don't spend a lot of time. I spend most of my time thinking about health and
They're
nutrition. But
captured by
where
tech.
is the education?
They're captured
Tech.
by
Okay.
big food, the food brands. If you look at now the market for online education or school tablets, it's incredibly competitive. It's a $1 trillion business, tech and education, and COVID accelerated it to the benefit of a handful of these companies. You also have, many different private foundations influencing education. Private foundations, again, that are dominated by mostly big tech, and some of the food brands and conglomerates, but a lot of it's tech. It's the same. It's interesting because if you look at who's funding all the fake proteins, it's mostly tech founders and tech venture capital firms. Like their two categories are alternative meats and AI and database and computing capacity. It's really interesting. I don't understand fully the psychology behind it, but I understand the market opportunity. And I think that it's devastating. It's devastating to hear our kids come home brainwashed. And then you see parents like crying out for school choice, and you see the rate of homeschools going up all over this country. And it makes sense. I mean, parents are the least conflicted of any of the populations in this country. Parents really just want what's best for their children. But it becomes also challenging if sometimes the parents are brainwashed. So there is this balkanization happening right now culturally. We feel it. We call it culture wars, but even underneath the bigger culture war topics is just this balkanization of parents wanting more freedom and choice for their family. But I do think that getting corporate capture out of the Department of Education is really, really critical. And then taking out these cultural agendas, which are being influenced by corporatism, out of the classroom as well. And allowing for actual true and free discourse and discussion. But the fact that kids are coming home and spouting off these plant-based fake meat agendas is very odd. It's very unhealthy.
One of the things that's interesting to me is because Silicon Valley, a lot of the tech people they're quite bright in many cases. They're obviously they're hardworking, bright
Mhm.
people. They are very often interested in performance, and I know when nootropics were coming
Yeah.
in, people were excited about using them, and then I see where not eating a ultra processed diet seems advantageous to that goal, and it would seem like these guys would be, I guess unless they just say, well, I'm more interested in the ROI than my own personal health, which seems a little conflicted in that way. But is there more movement within the tech space or the venture capital space where you live in thinking about these types of things? Like, can we improve the agricultural system so we have I think there's money to be made in regenerative agriculture. I honestly do. I think turn that into a a profit center, albeit it's, different than the standard
Mm.
model, but I mean, it's certainly there. Do you see any interest in that?
I've seen some. It's dissipating. There's something about engineering a facility that investors are more easily able to qualify than looking at a plot of farmland, which they feel has too many unpredictable variables. So when you create a closed environment for production, such as in one of these processing plants, you know what your capex is, you know what your monthly burn rate is going to be. You can look at your go-to-market objectives in a units basis. Very hard to do that same kind of modeling on, 500 acres of farmland in California. Really, really hard. That being said, when you bring in really smart brand thinkers who understand and can connect with a underlying unmet market need or cultural movement, and you pair that with somebody who's willing to put the financial risk on that 500 acres of farmland, you can make really good money. And so I am seeing groups like that. There's a group called Human Co. The founder was the founder of Hue Chocolates, which was one of the fastest growing gourmet chocolate brands. They sold it, and then they went on to create Human Co. And so Human Co. is really trying to figure out the market and investment potential for real food.
What do you think? This is, I have my thoughts on where like allopathic medicine is going. You talk about, wellness versus the
Hmm.
standard healthcare, the disease management model, or a lot of people like to call it the sick care system. And I see that, we now have this, well, United, as far as I know, the United States, and I think only New Zealand are the only companies that are our country that are allowed to direct to market on TV drugs to consumers, which is in the rest of the world is banned. And so you have this
Yep.
you're somebody, you're watching TV, you see this drug, and then you go to your doctor to hector your doctor into giving you this drug, and the doctor's kind of put in a position where they're like, maybe this isn't right. And the cynic in me thinks the greatest utility for the physician right now is a liability shield for the drug companies. I mean, because that's really they have to screen this stuff, and if they get it wrong, they're the ones
Hmm.
that are on the line, and the pharmaceutical companies are somewhat immune from that. But do you see, um, where do you see healthcare going in that direction? I mean, there's got to be a lot. I mean, I see the technology. We're like, can we deliver drugs Can we get drugs through the FDA quicker? Can we get them in people's
Hmm.
hands quicker? As that is considered the ultimate maybe goal is to, even kind of replace a lot of physicians with AI. A lot of the physician encounters could be replaced with AI, and then you don't need to, then the drug companies don't need to take the guy out to
Oh yeah.
dinner and buy his office staff donuts and stuff like that. So I think that's where I think we're going in that side of it. And of course, I'm trying to do something completely different on that. But where do you see healthcare going from a venture side? What is going on over there?
Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of personalized medicine platforms. I'm also seeing a lot of companies completely fail and burn out. Um, I see the AI doctor space. It's just there's more than I can count at this point. And you're right. If the job is to screen a patient, AI is fully capable of doing that. If the next job of the AI is to then prescribe the medication, the AI will likely do it better than a doctor, especially if that AI has less restrictions on it and is motivated more from finding the right match of a drug versus just the drug that they've recently agreed to, pick up and sell. So I see there being some marginal benefits of using AI for those two primary functions of screening and prescribing a pharmaceutical medication. It would, expedite quite a bit. I also see diagnostics. There's so much happening in the world of diagnostics, and some of it's really exciting. There's a group in Mount Sinai that has this new hair laser ablation mass spec technology that can look at the totality of your exposome across tens of thousands of biomarkers. Wearables, I think, has stagnated a little bit. The constant glucose monitoring. I mean, that might be a fad. It might be something that will remain niche. I don't know that everyone's going to be wearing a glucose monitor, but certainly different ways to do labs is very, very popular, and there's a lot of appetite in investing in that. I think as it relates to allotropic medicines, I'm not seeing a ton of innovation in that space. There's a lot in the way of wearable wellness devices, a lot in the way of different light therapies. Photobiomodulation is a space that's really picking up, and I'm personally excited about it. But, at the end of the day, like, there still exists this huge chasm between health, like actual health, where you just get it for free from being outside, or, you get it from investing in food. And then what venture capitalists are funding. There's just still a very big difference between those two categories.
Yeah, I think about, I can remember my time working in ERs, and we would have these so-called frequent flyers, people would be in every week, psych patients to come back,
Mhm.
suicidal once a week, every time. And the enormity of the expenses that goes into emergency acute care
Mhm.
is huge. And I would just think, if you could just take these people and feed them
Yeah.
properly, you would just put the bill. We're just going to buy you your food for the next
Yeah.
3 months. And that would probably be less expensive than all this emergent care that's going on. And I mean, could we come up with, do you think it's possible that we could use food as actual medicine at some point? Because, it just seems like it would be
It
cheaper
would
in the long
be
run.
immeasurably cheaper, and it would help our economy and diversify and build up the middle class of our economy so much, because it would reward those suppliers of food, and encourage real food production. And we know that the best real food comes from small, mid-sized production. So, I think that if doctors were empowered with writing food prescriptions, and they were empowered to write the right ones, um, and that was protected, that would have, enormous potential. Um, I I think that we get there by first proving it out, and I think you're doing it with your company really well and intelligently. Is you prove out the model at a private scale, that this is a great model for private mid-sized practice, and then you say, look, it's working, and these people are thriving, and their overall spend on healthcare has plummeted. And then you do it at you then roll it out at a community level, and then you start measuring the impact on the ER. And you start measuring the impact in the schools. I mean, the schools are really suffering. In the state of California, they're now building in padded rooms because they don't know how to handle some of these behavioral outbreaks. And so they're putting children in padded rooms to calm down. I don't think it's sustainable for us not to be investing in this.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I mean, the other thing is, obviously, with the tech stuff. I mean, you've got every kid on the planet now spends 6 hours a day staring at a phone or something like that. How do we fix that, or can we fix that, or is that something that you have an interest in?
There is a safe tech movement. It's small, but within that community, it's growing very quickly and with great interest. I mean, you can solve most people's migraine issues by managing what kind of light is coming out of their screens. And so there's a company here, and I've invested in it, called Daylight Computer, which is the first non-blue light tablet with full tablet functionality. And I've had users come up to me and say, I haven't had a migraine since using this, which is amazing because I was a chronic migraine sufferer. So there's this incredible economic opportunity. It's not, and again, we don't have to regulate. None of this is about regulation. If we had a free and true open press, and if we had free and true open internet, and we could dig into some of the science behind what's making us really truly sick, we could then create a whole economy, a booming economy with booming demand for products that are aligned with our human physiology.
Yeah. There's a lot that can be done around that sort of stuff. And I just think how, when I grew up as a kid, I was playing outside all the time. I grew up in the 70s. And so it was just like, I'd go out, it's summertime, I'd be
Mhm.
out after Saturday morning cartoons, and I wouldn't come in until, 8 p.m. when the lights came on the street. And nowadays, I mean, it just seems like kids are just clustered. And I guess maybe we live in a more dangerous world. I don't know what the story is
Mhm.
with that. But I mean, it's just something like I think this may be the first generation where the kids just don't ever experience what it is to live in a way. And I think we're being ushered towards this, there's this sort of
Yeah.
transhumanist movement where, we're going to be part AI, we're going to have, Elon Musk going to put a Neuralink probe in all our heads, and we're going to be able to interact that way. I mean, is that something that's of
A
concern to
hundred
you at all?
percent. It's a massive concern. I mean, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about what do you value about the human experience? And what do you view as eating away at thriving in this human body? And it's it becomes a deeply spiritual and philosophical question when you really dig into it. And I don't know if you've read the works of Rudolf Steiner at all, but he was this polymath, passed away in 1930s, but at the dawn of the century, he was bringing forward some incredible analysis of what transhumanism was going to do to our world. And this was, before we had the internet, but he predicted it. And he came up with many, many solutions to the issues. And he helped people understand and frame and contextualize why it is so important to have a spiritual science around the functions of living in a human body, to be an embodied spirit. And so, the only way to talk to, again, provide a counter argument to why transhumanism may be not something we all want to be jumping into right away. But we really have to go back and understand what it means to be a spirit embodied in physical form.
Well, if you go back the other way, I mean, your running mate, Bobby's uncle, John F. Kennedy, I remember he was a big proponent of
Yeah.
physical fitness in the schools. And you can go back to the 60s and see I can't remember the name of the high school in California, where you got all these guys who are just, doing monkey bars and push-ups, and they all look physically fit. And you contrast it to a modern school, and, 20% of the class is
Hmm.
obese. And there's a few athletes, some incredible athletes. I mean, because the training technology has gotten amazing. I can't imagine. I mean, his sentiment, saying it's sad to see sick kids, and it is. Can we have an overall comprehensive overhaul of, I guess the food in the school, the activity in the school? Is that something that, could we it's hard to mandate things, but how do we incentivize that?
Yeah, there's some schools now that are banning phones. I mean, that's probably only going to get you so far. I think that what happens when you stop censoring voices like yours, and you stop censoring voices who are saying that, blue light technology is making children really ill. When you stop censoring voices around questioning why, young women are having all of these issues around puberty and reproduction. It's we have to put an end to the censorship, because when people become fully informed as to what is happening to them because of the products they're using, they change their behavior. People tend to want to thrive, but if they're not given full information, the motivation will never be there. And then a misunderstanding about those that are trying to raise awareness. Those that have tried to raise awareness have been torn down by the media. They've been insulted. Their credibility has come into question. And when that happens, the message itself gets polluted, and no one wants to go near that message. It becomes an untouchable topic. Wi-Fi and EMF pollution is now one of these untouchable topics because it's considered to be debunked as a risk. And there's been a lot of motivation to discredit anybody who questions wireless safety today. So once you remove the censorship, you're going to see a cascading effect throughout society, and especially as it relates to childhood health, because that's, again, where you have the greatest potential for immediate action.
I don't know if there's somebody by the name of Marcia Engel. She was a physician that sat on she was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine. And she had, when she retired or left, she said, I can no longer support this because I realize that it is so corrupt. I can't even trust the data that we're publishing in medical journals anymore because of the conflict of interest and the corruption in there. How do we fix that? I mean, because, when you try to find out what is the science, and you have guys like Anthony Fauci saying you can't question what I have to say, when I know you interviewed Jay Bhattacharya the other day, saying, look, and you're shutting these people down. How do we fix that?
And going back to what I said earlier, we have to hold these platforms accountable for the collusion. And it's not within the best interests of these journals to be censoring scientific voices, because the minute it gets called out that they lose credibility. I just you and I would not spend $1 on these journals. And so I think having, X for scientific publishers is going to be really valuable. Interestingly, during the whole brainworm debacle, I thought to myself, how do we turn this around? Brainworm.ai is actually a pretty cool brand for a scientific research platform. So I went ahead and I bought brainworm.ai, and I'm working with several entrepreneurs to try to turn this in to a scientific publication platform, and really a new version of it. I mean, one in which we can have more diversity in the kinds of voices that are being published. We can change the dynamics and efficacy of peer review, which there's been virtually no evolution around. Our scientific method around health hasn't evolved in the last 100 years in how we think about publishing, sharing evidence, and putting out our works for peer review. So we now have tools, internet tools, research tools. We have ways to verify people we're hearing from on social media. If we package that together with AI and a new platform for intermediating scientific conversation, and we actively monitor for conflicts of interest and undue influences, and we truly allow all qualified voices into the room, we're gonna immediately address that very issue that you're talking about, which is that the legacy scientific publishers have lost credibility. So there's a great opportunity there. I just see opportunity. In all of these challenges, I just see endless opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you have like drug trials where they don't have to disclose their data. Even the peer review doesn't get it. They get summary statement from the drug company on what we showed, and that's what's peer review. I just don't get how that is
Allowed.
even allowed. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me at all. But that's what the
I
system we
don't
live in
understand
currently.
how it's allowed either. But again, if you're a shareholder in any of these companies, you should be mandating that information. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and that's one of the things. Like I said, with our company, we're licensed in all 50 states, and so we will be collecting data. We will be sharing our data, and it's just something that I think is
Yeah.
exciting because if you can start to say, hey, you can actually put your bipolar disorder into remission by just eating a certain way, but not by avoiding, this or that food. I think that's exciting because I can remember as an orthopedic surgeon practicing, I remember a lady coming in to me to tell me how whenever she was eating bread, her knee would hurt, and she thought she had some kind of gluten. I thought she was crazy because I wasn't trained in that. I literally thought she was a little nutty, and I just kind of ignored it and kind of went on and did what I was trying to do. But in retrospect, I mean, my gosh, I should have been listening to these
Yeah.
people. And there's so much value to be learned from this. And we've just, again, as a medical community, we just sort of we just ignore our patients in many ways, and just because we have these algorithms and we're
Mhm.
incentivized to check these dots. We get a big electronic medical record warning. Hey, you need to
Yeah.
prescribe this drug because this person has this condition, and the nuance and the observation has
And
largely
it
been
would be
lost.
great to be able to capture all of these N of one experiences. And they're not, oh,
Well, that's what
that's
we're
really
doing.
cool.
That's what we're doing. Yeah.
Well, I think, maybe our next conversation is a partnership about publishing on brainworm.
Yeah, maybe so. It'll be
Yeah.
interesting stuff.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Shawn. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate it. Glad we got to explore all of our, similar topics of concern and share where we're most optimistic. I think it's really exciting what you're doing.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Nicole. Appreciate it.